However, we're also bringing in various analysts and commentators to give us more insight on today's events. Political commentator and analyst Jason Unruhe joins us now from Ontario to give us his views and thoughts about today's events. Mr. Unruhe, welcome to the program. Let's go over the demonstrations that are taking place today. Of course, this is all happening on the eve of the Nakba Day commemorations, the day of catastrophe where Israel was created on Palestinian land, but it's also the day where the United States, under the Trump administration, is relocating its embassy from Tel Aviv to Jerusalem Al-Quds, which makes these demonstrations today much more significant and much more emotional for the Palestinians as well.
No, absolutely. To actually plan these to happen on the same day is tantamount to spitting in the face of the Palestinian people. To make this day the same one which they use to celebrate the theft of Palestinian land, the Israeli regime and the United States regime just. It's beyond insult to injury. This is something that is not just merely an insult, but an outright deliberate attack upon the dignity of the Palestinian people, which provides them with the justification for raging back against the injustices that have been done to them. I mean, it's not enough that over these decades their land has been stolen by Israel, fully supported by the United States in these efforts, but going to the length of moving the embassy to Jerusalem to put that official stamp right on the anniversary of the day in which the land was stolen to begin with. It's unfathomably cruel. It's something that's done specifically straight to insult the Palestinian people in a way that just is beyond description. I don't really know how to describe something like that. It's a horribly terrible thing. But yet here we are in this situation where the Palestinians are suffering this indignity while suffering from the live fire rounds and the gas being fired against them in the buffer zone, as it's called, and these people are carrying out a very righteous indignation towards that occupation of their land. And it's very interesting to see a lot of the commentaries that are being given in the West, many from the imperialist countries, stating how Israel is saying that they're firing back on terrorists that have arms and they're trying to kill them. Yet we can very clearly see from these live images that there are no weapons among these people. There are no guns in their hands, many of them carrying rocks which they throw at some of them with tennis rackets, sports equipment, which you could hardly claim to be weapons in this case when you have snipers firing upon them. The lies that are being used in much of the Western media to demonize the Palestinians who are being slaughtered. Upwards of 50 people have already been killed in these protests, and I believe about 28 today so far. And to so brightly contrast these images, the real life of what's going on, compared to the media coverage that's going on in many countries, the United States, Israel, the UK, many of the other Western countries, particularly those who are allied to the United States, spreading such blatant and obvious lies about what is going on and daring to call these Palestinians who are trying to survive, not even necessarily fight and to be a threat, but to just survive day to day with these minuscule actions in face of the tremendous military power that exists inside of Israel. It's wholly and completely disgusting to see how the Palestinians are being portrayed by this Western media.
Well, ladies and gentlemen, we're now going live to the Iranian capital, Tehran, where we're listening to a final statement being made with regards to a conference being held on Palestine. Let's listen in now.
At the end, all those who attended this conference, they all demanded that the U.S. withdraw from the nuclear deal signed with Iran to be condemned. The U.S. withdrawal be condemned, the deal signed with Iran and other European countries, because it is a sign of breach of promise and it runs counter to international regulations.
Well, we just reached the closing parts of the Interparliamentary Union of Islamic Countries, which were holding an emergency meeting on the U.S. Embassy relocation to Jerusalem, Al-Quds. As we mentioned, a number of events are taking place today condemning and showing their disapproval of the U.S.'s decision to relocate the embassy to Jerusalem, Al-Quds, and also with that strengthening the Palestinian cause and showing support for Palestinians. There was one event taking place now in Tehran, another one dubbed the New Horizon taking place in Mashhad. There was a unity conference on Palestine taking place in the Lebanese capital, Beirut. Mr. Unruhe, if you're still with us, these various events that we're seeing today taking place across the globe, and also with that, the demonstrations that were taking place over the past few weeks in various cities across the globe. Do these show a heightened sense of awareness with regards to the Israeli occupation of Palestine and also doubling up support for the Palestinian cause?
That this definitely shows more people are becoming aware of what's happening. The images, no matter how much they are distorted by the Western media, are making their way to people, in some form or another. I do believe that there are more people beginning to understand what's going on with the right of return that's being carried out right now, or specifically today, the Day of Rage. More people are beginning to be aware of what's going on. As someone who is in the West and does watch a lot of media, there's very little coverage of what's going on. Many of it just 15 or 20-second mention in a news headline briefing, but nothing substantial. But I have been noticing a lot more people becoming aware of what's happening what's happening over there, what Israel is doing to these Palestinians at this time. What that amounts to, I'm not certain, or how much more awareness there would need to be raised in order for this, for something concrete to be done about this situation, I don't know. But I think that the increasing number of protests, the increased discussion of what's going on various social media platforms, particularly Twitter and Facebook, I think this is a positive, a positive sign that a lot more people are starting to pay attention to what's going on. And unfortunately, it's taken this many weeks for them to start paying attention to these images in the media. It's very unfortunate the Western media has buried these so much and given it a token mention, if any mention at all. So to me, this does seem something rather positive, that more people are beginning to wake up, so to speak, and understand these images that they're seeing.
So for those of you who are just joining us, tension is running high in the Gaza Strip, as we can see now. Just hours before the U.S. opens its new embassy in the Israeli-occupied Jerusalem, Al-Quds, today has been dubbed a day of rage in Gaza and also in the occupied West Bank. We're seeing Israeli forces now firing gunshots and tear gas at Palestinian protesters, causing sections of these large rallies to disperse. Mr. Unruhe, let's go over some of the motives that we're seeing by the United States and by the Israeli regime with this decision. First of all, to announce Jerusalem al-Quds as the capital of the Israeli regime by the United States President back in December, and then all of the events that have taken place and what was set into motion following that decision. Many believe that all of this is intended to try and undermine the national identity of the Palestinians, coupling that with the Judaization and the quote-unquote Israelization of occupied al-Quds. Do you see it in that light as well?
Oh, I definitely do see it in that light. I would tend to wholly agree with that assessment. I think that over the decades that this occupation has been going on, the world opinion of the situation has been slowly turning away from Israel, and unfortunately taking this long. I think that now that you have very large mainstream forms of protests like a BDS now coming out, and not only just existing as a form of protest, but to go to the point where Israel bans them from coming into the country, which is really nothing new, but to pay attention to them to that level, to places in the United States wanting to criminalize any act of protest against Israel as anti-Semitism, to make it a criminal act, shows how afraid they are. The Israeli lobby has gone to a significant degree to try to get U.S. lawmakers to ban any kind of criticism against Israel, declaring it to be a form of anti-Semitism. But I think the fact that they have to go to that degree, they have to interfere in the rights of the American people to boycott, to protest something that they're against, the fact that they have to go to this length to do so shows that there is definitely a fear that Israel has of at least some sections of the world waking up to what's going on right now and to begin opposing their regime on a global scale. And I think that it's not just Israel that recognizes this. I'm sure the United States government recognizes this as well, that if this were to go on unchecked, to increase, and the world opinion begin to turn far more against Israel for the crimes that it's committing against Palestinians, that would jeopardize any support for the Israeli state. This act by Trump to so brazenly on such a significant day to have the U.S. Embassy in Jerusalem is trying to put a stamp of officialdom on it, to re-solidify Israel's perceived right to be where they are, to take Jerusalem as their capital. So I think that's definitely what the United States is doing. I don't think this is merely the act of just Donald Trump wanting to do something that he feels would irk Obama. I think this is something that those in positions of power in the United States, those who wield significant influence, who want to keep Israel as its vassal state inside of the Middle East, its greatest ally in the region, to try to continue that, to push that idea that Israel is legitimate, that this whole effort is done to do that, because now it becomes a fight in the future. Are we going, when there is hopefully some kind of settlement in the situation there, and say Jerusalem now is handed back to the Palestinians, what happens to the U.S. Embassy? Do they say, well, you can't do anything because our embassy is there? And I think that it's to use the image of a claws digging deeper into the territory that should rightfully belong to the Palestinians. I think that in this case, it's definitely the United States trying to, in its own way, push that kind of official status of Jerusalem as that capital of Israel, that Israel's always wanted, even though legally it cannot. But I think that trying to push an official status for that is definitely the whole point of moving the U.S. Embassy to that location.
Indeed. Let's go over to our guest, Mr. Unruhe, who's joining us from Ontario. I'd like to get your thoughts on the same issue we were discussing with Mr. Napier about the United States setting a precedent for other countries to follow suit and follow in the footsteps of the United States?
Well, it's definitely an insult to put it in the very least. I think that the United States usually tends to be the first one to do that. I think it's not just so much that they're setting an example, but they're essentially giving their signal to the rest of the world that they are to follow suit. Those countries which are allied to the United States, those countries which are under their domain, are being told to do the same, follow our lead or get left behind or suffer some kind of regime change should the situation come to that.
Mr. Unruhe, do you think that the United States, with these recent decisions that it's made, namely the announcing of Jerusalem al-Quds as the capital of the Israeli regime, the relocation which is taking place today, and in a wider prospect, the pulling out of the Iran deal, the JCPOA, it's basically putting the nail in the coffin of its foreign policy, of the U.S.'s foreign policy in the Middle East?
I think that there's probably a very good reason why they're doing all this. I think that for the United States, in the last several years, they've seen a significant decline in wielding influence across the Middle East. They have very clearly lost Syria. They're not going to be able to take it the way that they had wanted to capture. Iraq is starting to break away from their influence. Libya is in a total mess, and the son of Gaddafi has returned to the country and has vowed to run for president. I think these radical moves, which has harmed their reputation internationally, which has gone very much against the history that the country's taken, to so brazenly just destroy their own agreements, to withdraw from peaceful means of achieving what they want to do, is a symptom of an empire that is perhaps in decline. We have seen leading U.S. officials, like actual government officials, saying that the U.S. empire is in trouble. It's being challenged on too many borders. I think that this ties in very much with the JPCOA agreement and with declaring Al-Quds the capital, de facto capital of Israel by placing its embassy there. It's taking things to another level. It's trying to push that officialdom on to Al-Quds that this is going to be Israel in the future. This is going to be a U.S. Partly a U.S. territory through its proxies inside of Israel, despite what the world has to say for it. I think that the withdrawal from the JPCOA agreement is an attempt to try to destroy the agreement in order to be able to write a new one, which would include much harsher penalties against Iran, to include the missile program, which has showed significant success in some time in shoring up the military power of Iran, particularly with regards to its actions inside of Syria, which has caused the U.S. to lose that territory that they were hoping to get. I think that this is all a part of a larger reorientation of U.S. foreign policy to deal with their influence, which, while has been so great, is now beginning to decline to some degree. I think this is their way of trying to it's almost like a knee-jerk reaction from an empire that has been wounded. So I think that while this is certainly not the best thing that they could do to forward their own interests, and in fact it makes them look partially erratic, unreliable, particularly when it comes to the JPCOA agreement, but I think there's a rational reason behind it, and the trying to deal with the waning influence that the U.S. wields, not just in the Middle East but overseas, is another reason why we see this happening.
One other aspect to what we've been seeing ever since that decision, that announcement by the U.S. President Donald Trump on it was early December. I don't recall the exact date, December the 5th, if I'm correct, when he announced Jerusalem is the capital of the Israeli regime, we saw demonstrations taking place simultaneously in the Gaza Strip and in the West Bank as well. Do you think that with this announcement, we've seen a strengthening of the resistance and unity among Palestinians?
Oh, I think there's absolutely. I think that when something as significant as declaring Al-Quds the de facto capital of Israel, to place the U.S. embassy there, to make not just a significant move, but such an insulting one to the dignity of Palestinians, but that's going to be some kind for Palestinians who have been abused for decades, who have been insulted, who have been put down, who have been murdered by this, and it gives them, it's like, as they say, kicking the beehive kicking the hornet's nest, and making who are already very temperamental, very angry at an injustice that's being carried out against them even angrier. They're giving them something to that no Palestinian could really be against. I mean, there's no real Palestinian that could be standing there saying that they support this move. That's not going to happen. Regardless of any political differences between various Palestinian groups, everybody can understand to stop this move from happening, from suffering this kind of indignity. This idea that this is something that's merely formed by Hamas is absolutely ridiculous. It's of the reality of the situation, that this is something can with, because it is something that harms the dignity of each and every Palestinian, regardless of whether their religion may be, political orientation they may have.
Indeed.
This is I'm sorry?
Sure. Mr. Unruhe, stay with us. We're going to cross over to our correspondent, Mohammed Hamaya, who's joining us now from the Galandia checkpoint